Well, the NDP called on the Liberal government to do more on reconciliation with Indigenous people. And for instance, it wants the federal government to stop fighting Indigenous children in court over compensation. Liberal cabinet members abstained from voting today on the opposition motion. What does that indicate about the government's commitment to Indigenous people? Well, that motion did end up passing. And so we brought Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, on the program. Mr. Singh, before we get to today's motion, I want to begin our conversation by talking about these terrible events which we're now all processing from London, Ontario, and just get your thoughts on that.
It is again, unimaginable, the act of killing an entire family, the way that this now hate crime is rocking our country. I've reached out to some Muslim community members, and they sobbed hearing the news, thinking about their own family members that go for walks in the neighborhood. And to just think about the chilling and heartless and vicious killing of an entire family by an act of hate like that really shakes everyone's sense of safety and security. As we've said for a long time, that radicalization from the extreme right, from hate groups, from white supremacists, are the real and urgent threat to safety right now in Canada. And we are seeing attack after attack, from the attack in Quebec City, where innocent Muslim community members were praying and shot in the masjid in their place of prayer. We saw an attack in Toronto where a Muslim man was killed, again, in a case of hate crime, and now an entire family. My heart breaks for the Muslim community. My heart breaks for everyone who's thinking about their family right now. I grieve with the family. I grieve with the survivors, the family that survives, this family that was taken from us. And I commit to you that we need to build a safer place. We need to find ways to tackle hate. And I just can't find the words right now. This is horrible what's happened.
The shock, Mr. Singh, of this news, which we're all now absorbing, comes really on the heels of more shocking news that the country is absorbing. And that is the events in Kamloops, British Columbia, and the revelation of undocumented graves, seemingly undocumented graves at a residential school there. Lots of discussion certainly about that, but today much of the focus in the House of Commons was about a motion brought forward by the NDP looking for action, meaningful action for Canada's Indigenous people, but it spoke particularly about what the government has done. Can you briefly take me through what it is that you hope to achieve by this motion?
Certainly. We were all reeling from the discovery of those undocumented graves, those 215 children, the families, the moms and dads who sent their, or didn't send, whose babies were stripped from their arms. They were stolen from their language, their identity stolen from them. And also the lives were stolen from them. And as Canadians, as a country, we were all reeling in horror at this discovery. And those moments of mourning translated into then people saying, well, we need to go beyond just the symbolic gestures. We need to see action. And people started saying it's not enough for the federal government to then lower the flags at half-mast. We need to see action. So our motion was about that action. Immediately, right now, calling on Justin Trudeau to stop fighting Indigenous kids in court, who the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found were discriminated against willfully and recklessly. Despite that, Justin Trudeau is fighting them in court. Indigenous survivors, St. Anne survivors who are demanding justice, are being fought in court by the federal government. And then we're saying that the calls to action, the TRC calls to action, have to be implemented. Only a fraction of them have been implemented so far. We need supports for the families, the survivors, and communities of residential schools. And then we wanted to see a progress report within 10 days. So now this motion has passed, despite Justin Trudeau not even showing up, the cabinet not even voting. The will of Parliament is stated that they have to stop taking these kids to court, stop these legal actions against Indigenous communities, and we want to see a progress report within 10 days.
Okay, so let me jump in on you there, because the motion which did pass today, and did pass with some Liberal support, although, as you note, the Cabinet did abstain from it largely, the Prime Minister not there in the House of Commons today. The issue for the federal government at least when they explain it, is that they aren't opposed to compensation for this particular lawsuit for residential school survivors, or in this case, a human rights tribunal decision. It's not that they don't think there shouldn't be some sort of compensation. It's that they don't think the human rights tribunal itself should be the entity which makes that decision. Is your issue the government's intent, or is it entirely that you believe the Human Rights Tribunal, that the government should simply go along with that?
There is no question. Reconciliation requires walking the path of justice. Fighting a decision of the Human Rights Tribunal, one of the most respected institutions of Canada, is the wrong thing to do. We're talking about reconciliation and justice in light of those 215 kids that were found in undocumented graves. Canada has been a part of genocide against Indigenous people, without a doubt. And now the federal government is fighting a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision. This isn't a small institution. This is a very well-respected body that makes very important decisions. And to fight that decision in court is callous. It's the wrong thing to do. And clearly, the will of Parliament is, parliamentarians agree. They think it's wrong that the Liberal government is fighting these kids in court. So now we've got the will of Parliament stating that the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau should stop fighting these kids in court. I can't imagine how Justin Trudeau is going to continue to fight these kids in court when the Parliament has just said the will of Parliament is don't do it. So how would they continue to do that? They've already betrayed.
Although it's not binding. The motion is not binding.
Absolutely. But it is a clear declaration of the intent of Parliament. And how can the Canadian government continue to fight Indigenous kids in court when Parliament says stop? It should have been enough that the Human Rights Tribunal said don't do it. It should have been enough that reconciliation demands it. But now the will of Parliament also has added another reason. I can't imagine how they could continue. And if they do, it would be a further betrayal of Indigenous people.
I think there is a recognition, certainly from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that survivors of residential schools did not all have the same experiences. Some had particularly egregious, awful circumstances. Some of them have received compensation for that, but there is perhaps a recognition, and there was during previous settlements from the government, to recognize that there are different levels of trauma that have been experienced. And when there was residential school compensation, that there was different levels of compensation based on the particular experience, the particular harm. Are you suggesting that the Human Rights Tribunal, which suggested one flat amount, $40,000 for individuals who were part of that particular group, that there shouldn't be any negotiation, that some people shouldn't get more than that?
There's nothing stopping the Canadian government from giving more. This is just a basic starting point. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has found, and this is specifically about Indigenous kids that were in Indigenous child welfare, that they were discriminated against. And they
so why is a court process not the right venue to seek out what that number should be?
Fighting kids in court is not reconciliation. If a Human Rights Tribunal makes a finding and you want to actually take it seriously and you want to take reconciliation seriously, you follow that finding. If I was Prime Minister, I would absolutely start with following the orders, the numerous orders that the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has put forward, and those rulings and orders that this Liberal government has ignored. I mean, the whole point of having a tribunal like that is for it to be able to make a decision and for that decision to then be carried out. The fact that the Liberal government is fighting this, instead of saying, okay, we will listen to this ruling and then we'll work on additional supports, that's fine. But there's no reason that they have to fight a decision made by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which is a very well-respected body that makes well-informed decisions with experts from around the country that sit on that. So there's no reason, there's no justification for the Liberal government right now to be fighting this decision in court. They should immediately implement the decision of the Human Rights Tribunal, and then they can work for additional supports. Absolutely. But they should do at least the bare minimum. This is a question of the Liberal government not even willing to do the bare minimum.
Can I turn back once again, Mr. Singh, to the attention that we're paying to London, Ontario, and as we're all reckoning once again, awfully once again, with racism in this country and the potential consequences of it, with the news that this is being investigated as a hate crime. This is something you have spoken about within your own past. Certainly, Muslims in this country have been attacked for their faith before. As a Sikh man, you yourself have noted past incidents. And I wonder, sort of how you're feeling in the sense of everything that is now transpiring.
Well, I just think about what this means to a family. I've experienced Islamophobia numerous times. Many of it has been publicly shared. I've experienced it personally, but I can't imagine what the message is sends to families right now in London, across Canada. You can't even walk the streets. You can't even walk in your neighborhood without being afraid of being mauled, being run down and killed. An entire family is gone because someone thought that that was the thing to do, to go in and commit this act of hatred, vile hatred, and take this family from all of us. It is scary. Imagine what families are thinking about right now. Maybe this evening, when a family was about to go for a walk, they're not going to go for that walk. Maybe people are thinking they can't leave their homes. And that is a sad and heartbreaking reality, that people are now worried about whether they can even go for a walk in their own communities.
Jagmeet Singh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.